Welcome to SEVA VentRounds. Today we're going to talk about three abnormalities, and essentially it's in the realm of multiple trigger or double trigger. Today is July 22nd, 2025, and here we go.
22.
2025.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
July 22nd, 2025.
Yeah.
Jeez. All right, concentration in the nation. Disclosures: no endorsement of any mode, ventilator manufacturer. Whatever we say, it's our opinion. It does not represent the Cleveland Clinic. Those are my disclosures and Rob's disclosures. Just keep your microphone muted. If you want to ask something, unmute yourself. Or you can also use the chat function. We're monitoring both. There's CME and CRCs for everybody. And so I think that the first thing that I would ask you to consider sharing with us is what are there's three causes that we have identified for multiple trigger. And what multiple trigger means is that there's two inspiratory events that occur, and I'm going to put here on pressure control. You have inspiration, and then you see another breath rapidly thereafter. Okay, and that's what in general terms in the literature it's called as double trigger, or also you'll hear the term breath stacking. And so those are the items that you are gonna. Oh no, I'm gonna mute whoever is talking. There you go, mute it. So what are the causes for double trigger? If you want to put it on the chat, or if you want to mute yourself, whichever way you want. There's three causes for multiple trigger, double trigger breath stacking. All right, Megan hitting really rapidly. Excellent. So we have achieved all. There we go. So we have early cycle. Very good. The second one, false trigger. And we're missing one. One more. Have no fear. So two breaths or more followed. There you go. Thank you, Alicia, for the early trigger. That's like a pirate. Early trigger. So just so that you put this into context of how would it look if it's early cycle. If you imagine a breath, this is the PMOS. So the breath starts here and it ends around there. Then the ventilator gets triggered by the patient. So it would look like this. Then there's early cycle, meaning that the ventilator cycles earlier than the patient. And that triggers another breath. Okay. And then the patient exhales. So this is just the pressure waveform. So it was patient triggered. Both breaths were triggered by the patient. Okay. And it's the PMOS was from here and triggered both. So that's what an early cycle is. A false trigger can be either a mandatory or a patient trigger breath, but you're going to have the pressurization of the breath, okay? And the PMOS is absent. There's no PMOS over here. So this can be patient trigger and this can be patient trigger, or this may be machine trigger and then patient triggered, but there's no PMOS, no PMOS. Here there's PMOS throughout and it activates it. So that's what a false trigger is. And there's multiple reasons for that. It can be from reverberation in the line, in the circuit, the algorithm for control, as we see on some servos, and heartbeat oscillations, whatnot. And then the last one is early trigger, where what you would say is a breath. It's a mandatory breath. So meaning that it's triggered by the machine, and then rapidly afterwards you see another, and there's a patient. So it's mandatory following by patient. Uh, and this is an early trigger. And you'll see a little bit more of the examples. But this, so just remember, whenever you see two breaths together or more, you have to think, is this early cycle, false trigger, or early trigger? It can be one of those. And this is important because of what you're going to see in a second. Rob, did I
You
see
want to draw in the PMUS curve on the last one?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. So in this one, the breath goes like this, and then there's evidence of PMUS afterwards. There's PMUS afterwards. So you can see that the ventilator triggers first and then follows the patient activity, which triggers the next one. Thank you, Roberto.
Sure.
All righty. Okay. So just for your viewing pleasure, so now you see this is Eduardo and this is the reality. so let's try to identify these first. And there's so much into this graph to read about, but I thought that it would be good for you to start going in order, because if you don't go in order, you lose. So let's start by, this is a servo U ventilator, and just for your viewing pleasure, I put everything. I'm not hiding anything. So here's the PRBC. So what's the tag for PRBC? Very rapidly, good job. So it's pressure control, good, CMV, and A. And this is relevant for what you're gonna see right now. So pressure control essentially means that we're controlling the pressure during the breath. And the pressure is being controlled during the breath. Now, people may tell, you can see how beautifully it controlled the pressure here, and so here, and so here. So ventilators don't control perfectly the pressure, but you can see that the flow, the patient and the ventilator are doing whatever with the flow, so the flow is not being controlled. So this is definitely pressure control. So whenever you're controlling pressure, your eyes come to see the flow. That's a first thing. Then it's CMV, and CMV means that all the breaths, every breath is mandatory. And so what that means is that it's either machine triggered or cycled. It can be patient triggered, but it's gonna be machine cycled. Does that make sense? Rob, comments?
Nope, that's good.
So that means that, for example, and in this ventilator, it tells you when the patient is doing it or when it thinks that the patient is doing it. So you see the change in color from orange to white. You see that? From orange to white. And that tells us that this patient is on a trigger that it's pressure, although if I come down here, it says liters per minute, so that doesn't make any sense. And sometimes there's this nonsense, but usually the change in color means that it's being triggered by changes in pressure. And so it's patient triggered, but cycled by time, cycled by time. And so that means that it's every breath is mandatory. And then the final is adaptive. And adaptive means that we have told the ventilator that we're giving a set tidal volume where we set a tidal volume that it's a target. The ventilator is not controlling the tidal volume, and the patient can get more or less, and the ventilator is going to move up and down the pressure according to an algorithm. So this is a good example of three breaths, one after the other. And you can see on the first one, the patient barely got any tidal volume. In the second one, it got almost 500 cc's, which is double of what it should get. And in the third one, it got less than that. So the tidal volume is not being controlled. The machine is targeting. And obviously right now the machine is going bonkers because it's seeing tidal volumes all over the place. Rob?
Just to clarify what you said about identifying the trigger variable, in this case, the orange or the yellow waveform was turned white, indicating a pressure trigger. If it had been a flow trigger, you'd see that green waveform would turn white.
Excellent. Great point. Thank you, Roberto. So that's the targeting scheme, and this is very important because now you know, your eyes should come because you're controlling pressure. You should come and see the flow, even though you may not want to look at the flow because it looks horrendous. You should come and see the flow. You're controlling the pressure, so you look at the flow. That the breaths should be, because they are mandatory ventilation, they should all have a eye time of 0.9 seconds, and that it's adaptive. So the pressure may vary, but the ventilator is going to try to hit the target tidal volume that you have for this patient. All right? All right. Now, what is the load during inspiration? So try to take a look at this and come to terms. Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody had it ready. The PMOS, or your super fast typer, these days, everybody's talking about PMOS. Now, here's so I absolutely agree. But there's also a little rule that sometimes you can be able to see when there's no PMOS. Is there any breath where you don't see any PMOS of the inspiration? So I'm naming them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in 4, so this is all PMOS. It does, yeah, Arcel, that's right. So in the third one, you see it was triggered by the machine, but and there's this little amount, this little humpity dump, very small, tiny, and sad, in which very little amount of tidal volume went into the patient, very little, and it goes back to baseline very fast. And so I'm just saying that this is a breath that seems to be passive. Now, we're going to discuss more about it, but these breaths, if I would ask you, what's the load? What would you say for breath number 3, Arcel, since you have recognized the absence of PMOS there? Yeah, it's mainly elastic. So the ventilator couldn't get any air until into the patient. You see that? Good eyes. There you go. Good, Fernando. Rob?
I just wanted to clarify something you said about the inspiratory time.
Yes.
Mode, you said an inspiratory time of 0.9, and that looks true except for breath number 4, right?
Yeah, we're coming back to that one.
Okay, just
Yes.
highlight it. We'll come back to it.
Yes, I actually, that's exactly why I mentioned your eyes are seeing exactly the abnormality that it's abnormal. Aha, the abnormal that it's abnormal. All righty. And during expiration, my friends, do you see what do you see? Elastic or resistive or PMOS? During expiration, sorry, during expiration, do you see? Yeah, PMOS. Good job, Fernando. So a lot of PMOS. You see how it doesn't decay exponentially as it should. Good job, Eric and Alicia. So this is pure elastic, sorry, PMOS event. So the patient is actively inhaling, and then there's evidence of activation of the expiratory muscles, which may have relevance for breath number 3. So we'll talk more about that. So let's start with the PV discordance, and we're gonna start with breath number 1 and 2. Does that sound fair? So breath 1 and 2, what's the trigger? Normal, early, late, false, or failed? Oh my! I think that this is the fastest typing group I've seen in a long time. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's early, and the pathway here. Just you have to train your eyes to look what's triggering the first breath. And if the first breath is mandatory, which you can see here, because there is no patient signal that it's triggering, and the ventilator knows when it's the machine or it's the patient. And so I think that that's a really good thing that ventilator manufacturers did, is to change the color or to put markers for when the breath is triggered by the patient. granted, you could tell me, well, Eduardo, I don't need that. I don't need the change in color. I can see the drop in pressure here. And that's a good marker. I can also see the flow is super high over here, telling me that there's PMOS. But I will applaud the ventilator manufacturers that put it in the actual waveform rather than on a corner, lonely, telling you that it's assisted or spontaneous or whatever. So early, this is definitely an early trigger. So you're seeing a double trigger or multiple trigger here because of an early trigger. And what that means is that the ventilator was activated by the patient, the machine. And look at it for a second. And you see how the ventilator pressurized and then it started to decay. And then there's evidence. So it should have reached here baseline, just like this one over here. See, if you see this one is identical to this initiation, and it should have reached zero flow. And then the patient activates, and this is all PMOS. The breath cycles off, but the patient is still taking a breath in, and this is all PMOS. And then the PMOS finishes, and this that looks like a pause is simply the muscle relaxed, and now you have a plateau pressure up here. That's essentially a plateau pressure during that breath. So breath in, PMOS, lots of PMOS, a lot of tidal volume goes in. So it's essentially the patient didn't exhale anything. So it's this amount of tidal volume plus this amount of tidal volume, one on top of the other. So this one on top of this one. And so if I put that one on top of this one, it probably is up here like that. And so the patient has, I don't know, 600 cc's inside their lungs. And that pressure shelf that you see up here, because there is no flow, that's the new plateau. So this early trigger caused a double breath with delivery of these two tidal volumes on top of the other. Rob?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a note in the chat about why flow goes to zero when the patient stops making an inspiratory effort. The patient apparently relaxed, but if they just relaxed, this ventilator won't let them exhale during the predefined inspiratory period. But if they make a positive expiratory effort and the pressure rises by, I think it's 3 centimeters of water, then they can exhale during the inspiratory time.
And that's during this particular ventilator.
This particular event, right?
In some ventilators, you can exhale during, regardless of the centimeters of water. But this is good for your eyes to train, because once that you start looking at this, you say, why is there a pause in there? And I saw that somebody, Alicia, recognized the pause, and that pause is a manifestation of the way that the algorithm is built for this ventilator in particular during the breath. So what you see here is a very tiny breath that was passive, and then the presence of PMOS triggering another breath. So now it's important for you to recognize and to think about that once that we call the early trigger, I am not going to talk about early cycle. Although there's an early cycle occurring here, it will just make you nuts if you start trying to. So the first one that we fix is your early trigger. Then you go and deal with the rest of the problems. Make sense? All righty. So now we're gonna go to the next breath, and so we have this breath. So breath number 3, 4, and 5. Okay. So breath number 3, 4, and 5. What's the trigger? Is it normal, early, late, false, or failed? Yeah, have no fear. Put your stuff. What is 3, 4, and 5? Is it an early trigger, late trigger, false, or failed? All right. So let me guide you through the forest of this. So I see an early, and the answer is, remember who triggered the breath. So the first breath is actually triggered by the ventilator, correct? So that's a mandatory breath. And during the inspiration, you don't see any PMOS. So this what you could say this looks like a normal breath, right? It's a mandatory breath. It's triggered. There's no PMOS. So essentially, this is a mandatory breath in a passive patient. And then the breath cycles off at 0.9 seconds. It cycles off. And immediately after it cycles off, you see evidence of PMOS. How do I know there's PMOS? One, the machine is telling me, but two, I see the flow is not exponential in decay. You see the belly over here. That's evidence of PMOS. And actually, if I had to draw how the PMOS, how the flow would have looked if this patient was passive, it would have looked something like this. Something like that. That would be how the flow and the PMOS would have looked something like this, in a way. So this is a type. This because the prior one is an early trigger. This is likely to be also an early trigger, and I actually know the patient. So, but this was an early trigger, and this is a matter of how things are being defined right now. So if you go to early trigger, there's a subtype of early trigger that's called reverse trigger, and the reverse triggers has different ways that they present. Some of them the PMOS activates after the mandatory early on, and sometimes in the middle of it, and sometimes in the early expiration. And this is one of those reverse triggers that occurs early in the expiration. And it's so big that it activated not only one breath, but two breaths. And we're going to talk about that. So I just want to be sure that you understand that this is even though the PMOS didn't happen during inspiration, it happened early on in exhalation, and that is currently still called an early trigger of the type or variety that we call reverse trigger. So I'm gonna pause for a second and see if any questions. Rob, any questions so far?
Yeah, our Saul points out on a breath number 3 could possibly be thought of as a failed trigger. And I suspect that he says that because if you look at the exponential, the curve is not smooth exponential, right? You see two little bumps towards 0. And are those failed trigger efforts, or are those cardiac oscillations? My guess is that they're cardiac oscillations because this patient is clearly strong enough to trigger, right?
That's correct. Those were definitely cardiac oscillations, and you could not see them very well on the others, but that's what they were. So thank you for highlighting that.
So those would not be failed triggers. If anything, they'd be a failed false trigger.
But that's I would ask here, one of the key when you're thinking that this is a failed trigger is to the only way to clarify that, especially when there's so much PMOS, expiratory PMOS, is to do an expiratory pause to look at this, or to paralyze the patient briefly and try to figure out what's happening there, if these were or not. But yeah, you need a way to try to see the difference between one or the other. So this is a reverse trigger, but I wanted to pause for a second because there's an abnormality here. So we agree this is a key abnormality, which is an early trigger causing multiple double trigger, and then here a triple trigger. So you have 1, 2, 3, 3 breaths in a row. But Rob highlighted a point, which was, Eduardo, don't forget that the I time is not the way that it should be, right? So I said, because it's mandatory, that every breath should be exactly 0.9 seconds. And that's true. I'll stand by that. That's a true statement. But here it didn't happen. You can see how the I time from here to here, this one is clearly short compared to the next one, which is the same size as the breath number 3. So why did this happen? Why did breath number 4 is so different? Anybody knows?
I know, but I'm not telling.
So that's one of the abnormalities of this algorithm. Uh, the reason why you're seeing, yes, Arsa, this is a safety mechanism of the ventilator. When they created this, they made a rule uh, in which they said if the tidal volume that the patient generates during the mandatory breath during the PRBC is, I believe, 1.5 times the tidal volume that you set. So meaning that if it's 450, then it will cycle off the breath. It will cycle off the breath as a safety mechanism, thinking that the tidal volume has overshot 1.5 times your tidal volume. Rob?
And as far as I know, this isn't documented in the manual anywhere. At least I haven't been able to find it.
So we figured this out one day when we were looking at this and saying, is this fake news? But then you can see it consistently.
Yeah, we called the rep, the sales rep called the engineer, and they verified it, but we couldn't find it that day in the manual.
The second part that I want you to pay attention for a second is there is something that is highly abnormal on this waveform, because we are on, if you notice, we are supposed to be in adaptive pressure control, and that means that it reads the prior breath to give you exactly what you want. So you see how we are in pressure control, and the first breath is very tiny, then the next breath is very tall, and the next one is even taller than the other one. So you see the difference in pressures, how much variability is happening. Alicia, yes, this is only on PRBC that we know of on this, and in volume support. So both of them in this ventilator per se. So you see how the pressures are different here. And that should not happen when you're in pressure control. Usually the pressures are about the same size. And the reason is that there's two algorithms working at the same time. For the passive breaths, it will deliver certain amount of pressure to deliver your tidal volume. So, and it reads a passive breath as one that was triggered by the machine. And for breaths that are triggered by the patient, it has also the same algorithm, but for seeing how much pressure to support those breaths to achieve the tidal volume. Thinking that obviously if the patient is passive, there's no PMA, so it will require more inspiratory pressure or less. So that's why it uses two different algorithms. So the intelligence on the algorithm that was built in because of if you trigger, meaning that there's PMOS and you don't trigger it, ensuring that you are achieving the target tidal volume, can play out in a very bizarre way, as you see here, with very tiny breaths delivering very tiny tidal volume, and for very large breaths delivering a very large amount of tidal volume for these patients. So pause for a second. Rob, thoughts?
Again, what you just said, as far as I know, is not documented anywhere. I believe you and I got this from the engineers during a phone call, but it's still not clear to me what's going on, and it would be really great to get a more clear description of these algorithms.
So here's another breath. So the first thing that we did when we saw this is that this patient had early trigger, so we dropped the respiratory rate. This patient, the goal was safety. I will make this a very severe lung injury. And what I want you to see is you here now see this is a breath a little bit afterwards. And you can see now that the inspiratory pressure for the mandatory breath, you see the mandatory breath, even though it still had an early trigger later on, you can see that the pressure has gone up. The ventilator, the algorithm is working and it's starting to increase the pressure to deliver those higher pressures to deliver a little bit more tidal volume. And then there's still those breaths that are triggered by the patient that are delivering higher pressure than the ventilator. But we dropped the rate to 11, from 20 to 11. You can see it's the same patient, same settings. We just dropped the rate. And now the patient is triggering. You see that? The patient is triggering. The breath is, now it's a patient triggered, and the other one is patient triggered. But again, it did that thing in which the I time is much shorter than what I set. And it is because the tidal volume is much larger one that the patient is set to receive. So this odd, I mean, the team at the bedside were confused and perplexed, as you should be, because of this behavior of the ventilator of saying, why is it giving me a shorter I time and then a longer I time? Why is it giving me low pressures and then high pressures? And this just comes from looking at your ventilator and understanding what's happening. So finally, we decided then to change the patient to pressure support to auto mode, and with a very low respiratory rate. You'll see the respiratory rate is still 11, but in this mode, the patient now can get the tidal volume that the patient wanted. That that cycling process has disappeared. You can see that how it's gone. All the breaths are pressure. This is a pressure support breath with 10 centimeters of water, but getting 11 cc's per kilo of ideal body weight, which was too high for this patient. So the next thing that we did was to, and she was fully sedated at that time, so paralysis was provided, which made the patient PMOS go down and calm down. So in summary, for all of you, is the key findings. We reviewed the PRBC and what type of tag it is, which is PC-CMVa. We highlighted some of the nuances of the mode itself on this type of ventilator. And so we talked about the two types of algorithms, the same algorithm for adaptive, but that applies for what would be mandatory or trigger patient or ventilator triggered breaths, and for patient triggered breaths, it behaves differently. We also recognize the 1.5 BT rule that will make it cycle earlier than what you would be looking for. And then we talked about early trigger as a cause of multiple trigger. And we demonstrated that with the different phenotypes of reverse trigger that were occurring here. So what I would say in general as a take-home message is that you need to learn this careful observation of your ventilator will give you more insight of what is only on the manual or may not even be mentioned on the manual you cannot see. Rob?
Just again to reiterate that we started off with a multiple trigger due to early triggering. We made a change on the ventilator. We still got multiple triggering, but now it's due to early cycling. And the only way to get rid of it altogether was to change the mode.
Oh, I love that. That's a great point. So we went, so, and the early cycle was due to a glitch on the ventilator. Well, not a glitch, a safety feature on the ventilator.
Right.
I love that, Rob. So much, right. So insightful. And then we changed to pressure support, and we saw that we couldn't keep our safety goal. And we said, that's it, paralysis for this patient, because the patient was already sedated. And even though was deeply sedated, we were unable to do any changes on the ventilator to maintain safe ventilation. And so the goal rules your actions. All right. In terms of, these are the code for the CCF CME. I'll highlight that we are at episode, I think this is episode 97. Woohoo! And then the SEVA program is fully sold out for this September. And so if you're intending to come, it's time for you to start registering for April, because we ran out of slots, which is a success. And we will go into a blitz during September and October, visiting several of our centers and learning with all of you. So have a great time. And any other final comments, Roberto?
Nope, that's very good. This was a great one. Thank you, Eduardo.
Yeah, no, thank you all. And actually, this was Alex sent it our way, so we really appreciate it.